Hey, I'm Graceffo from Black Belt Magazine's Destinations, and we're visiting Shanghai University of Sport, and we're going to be learning about freestyle wrestling. Now, I'm a PhD candidate, and my major is wrestling, and I'm writing my dissertation as a comparison between Chinese traditional Shuaijiao wrestling and modern Western wrestling. Modern Western wrestling includes Greco-Roman wrestling and freestyle wrestling. The university doesn't have a freestyle wrestling team, so I'm a member of the Chinese wrestling team, and most of my teammates actually come from a Greco-Roman wrestling background. They all grew up in wrestling schools. Luckily, they're pretty helpful, and they're all willing to work with me on my freestyle wrestling as they all know a bit of the art. Because I'm approaching wrestling from the position of both doing my research for my dissertation and because I like to train and fight MMA, I really like freestyle wrestling because in many ways it's the closest to MMA style wrestling. Freestyle is the least restrictive form of wrestling. In judo, you're not allowed to grab the legs when you're standing. In Greco-Roman, you're also not allowed to grab the legs in standing or on the ground. Chinese wrestling, you throw your opponent to the ground, but you don't go to the ground with him and pin him. With freestyle, you grab the legs, you take him to the ground, and you work for the pin. So it works very well for MMA. Now, one of the disadvantages for me is that I'm coming from an MMA background rather than a wrestling background. So occasionally, I like to roll on my back and fight off my back. I don't do it as well as those jiu-jitsu guys, but I do it. Anyway, in freestyle wrestling, that's pretty much the end of the match. When your back is touching the ground for 3 seconds, you lose. At the university, I learn technique and I do a lot of sparring, both to increase my strength and to increase my wrestling ability. But in wrestling, just like in MMA, the hardest part is definitely the part on the ground. Fighting on the ground is much more strength intensive, much more cardio intensive, and you get tired a lot faster fighting on the ground. Now, in a real wrestling match, that ground fighting is going to be much shorter than it is in an MMA fight. The thing I like best about my teammates is that they love to play. They're just absolutely silly and they're constantly wrestling with each other. Usually when I come in the morning, the coach lets the team play football or play tag as a warm-up. Since I don't like to play games, he assigns one of the guys to practice freestyle wrestling with me while everyone else is playing. People ask me all the time what's the best martial art as far as being a base for MMA. And according to my experience and also from watching a lot of UFC, clearly it's wrestling. While I think all forms of wrestling are great, and I'm even including judo in that group, I think there's an order in which we need to learn things. Greco-Roman builds the most strength, but Greco-Roman is also the most restrictive form of the Western wrestling. So I think you should go from the most restrictive to the least restrictive. I really think you should learn Greco first, and then maybe judo, and then maybe freestyle wrestling, and then transition into MMA grappling and jiu-jitsu. If you learn the most restrictive art first, then you're constantly adding to your knowledge rather than taking away from it. So going from MMA to wrestling, I want to be able to throw out half the techniques I already learned. If you started with Greco and then you went to freestyle, you're adding, you're not taking away. But don't take my word for it. I'm just an old man in a young man's game. Get out there and find someone to wrestle with and make your own opinions. Or if you want to come to China and train, there's government scholarships available. If you already have a bachelor's degree, go online and find the Chinese government scholarship or the Shanghai City government scholarship. You can apply for any of the sports universities in China. I'm Graceffo from Black Belt Magazine's Destinations, reminding you to keep training, keep fighting, and let your martial arts take you to your destination.